Hey, thanks so much for tuning into the podcast. I'm very excited to have my guest today, Linda Ray Holcomb, on the podcast, and she is the president of Glick Beer. So, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into this project of resurrecting Glick?
Yeah, hey there, Jim. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast. Yeah, well, Gluek is I was born into the Gluek, not the Gluek family actually, but into the Gluek enterprise. Um, my great grandfather was the right-hand guy at the original Gluek Brewing Company in Northeast Minneapolis. It's over by Psycho Susie's there, kind of right on the river or kind of in the Grain Belt neighborhood.
Hmm.
And he was the right hand guy there, brewing in the cellars and stuff. And they were, just kicking along until Prohibition came along. And then the Glick Brewing Company owned about 100 different buildings around the Twin Cities and put their mark on a lot of them. They have beautiful stained glass windows with Glick beer signs all over, still to this day in the Twin Cities buildings. But they were called tide houses. And so the brewery would brew the beer and then distribute the beer to their own bars, basically, and sell it direct to the consumer. And at that point, there was no distribution. So it was kind of hard to keep track of where all the beer was going. And I think, and then they closed, they were forced to close down all their tide houses during Prohibition. And during that time, the brewery survived by brewing near beer, which was pretty popular for those breweries back then. And also a lot of different sodas, cream sodas and root beers and stuff like that, just to get them through Prohibition. And during that time, my grandfather purchased one of the buildings that they had put up for sale because he wasn't in the family. He was just best friends with a couple of the Glick brothers. And so when Prohibition ended at midnight, um, my grandfather opened what's now Glick's Bar downtown Minneapolis in the Warehouse District. It's right there across the street from the Target Center and Target Field. And he opened, because he wasn't in the family, he opened Glick's Bar and continued to sell Glick beer just like they had been doing before. So they kind of found a loophole in prohibition laws because he wasn't a family member. The only difference was then distribution had been put into place, and so all of the beer had to be distributed on a horse and cart to the bar rather than directly from the brewery. So it's a pretty cool story. Glicks has been around since a year before Minnesota was declared a state.
So,
So it's literally
1857, we're talking, right?
seven. Yeah, and Minnesota became a state in 1858. So it's pretty cool that those brewers made their mark that early. Glicks was actually the first, it's number 001 manufacturing company in Minneapolis. So back in the day, they were doing some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I often wondered
And
what
right now,
the. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say I just hope to keep that dream alive. Long live Glick beer. So
Yeah, absolutely. I was just gonna say I often wondered what the connection between Glick Restaurant and the beer was. Now I know. And correct me if I'm wrong. The Glick Restaurant is the oldest in Minneapolis, right? Oldest bar for sure.
it's the oldest bar downtown. Yep, it's
Uh,
90 years old, 90 plus now. So
that's awesome. So
yeah, I mean,
take
I guess you got to be doing something right if you're going to stay open that long. But
yeah,
you
for
definitely
sure.
have ebbs. You have ebbs and flows, and times change. And if you don't just keep evolving, then I think have a lot harder time than otherwise.
Glick sold to Heilman Brewing, right? And then at some point it went to Cold Spring. How did that transition happen? And then when was the decision made to stop brewing Glick, which was, I don't know, was that like 10, 15 years ago or something?
Yeah, it was in '09 actually. So Glick, the family was really doing well, but they survived Prohibition. Obviously, they survived the Depression. They were there during the Civil War. Glick was one of three breweries in the entire United States to supply beer to the troops in World War II, which is pretty cool.
Hmm.
Um, and in the 60s, Glick had a beer called Stite, which was the first patented malt liquor in the United States. And it kind of went viral. It got into 27 of our 50 states. And so it was being widely distributed throughout half the country. And, as it grew, the family, as in any family business, the original founders run their course, and then their kids take over. And by this time, it was kind of what they call the cousin coalition, where it was a bunch of the cousins of the original brewers. And I think they kind of all weren't on the same page with what their plans were for the brewery. So they started to have some animosity between the family members. And it was obviously getting pretty big, being distributed in half the United States. So Heilemann came along and offered them something that they couldn't refuse. And so the cousins of the original brewers sold the brewery to Heilemann in 1964, along with 44 original Glick beer recipes. And so then Heilemann took it over and didn't really know what to do with the brand, I don't think. And so, they tried to create a bunch of different styles and maybe chase some trends at the time. And I think trend chasing is pretty dangerous. It's a dangerous business to get into because you're always having to pivot and you're always following what the consumer's taste buds are. And so I think they really didn't know which way to turn with the brand. So Heilemann then sold it to, I think it was a private equity group, like in Connecticut. And it was only there for a couple years, and they really didn't know what to do with it. I think they were just financial guys that didn't really know the craft of brewing. And so they turned it around really quickly after a couple years and sold it to Cold Spring, Minnesota, Cold Spring Brewery. And they actually brewed Glick beer for many, many decades. Actually did a pretty good job with it. They had a new owner of the brewery who dumped millions of dollars into it and relaunched the Glick brand. At that time, they renamed Cold Spring Brewery to the Glick Brewing Company in Cold Spring. And we actually signed over the rights of the name so that they could use that. And for years, because I was working at Glick's Bar back then, we 2 or 3 times a year would bring our entire staff up to the brewery just so that they could take the tour, drink the beer, meet the brewers and the people, and kind of have a story of their own to tell their customers when people would come into the bar. I always thought it was important that instead of telling people what they should say to other people, that they should create a story of their own at the brewery and then have that story to tell. So that worked well for many years for us. But in '09, I think it was a couple years before then, Cold Spring Glick Brewing Company renamed their brewery to Third Street Brewing Company, which is now what it's called. And at that time, they launched their own brand of Third Street beer. And they came out with, 6 or 8 different styles of beer under the Third Street label. And I think the Glick brand, also brewing Glick at the brewery, was kind of a conflict of interest for them, trying to launch their own brand. So they, in 2009, retired the brand, the Glicks. And so from 2009 until 2016, Glick beer was basically laying by the road, the wayside. And I had a couple kids and no longer felt like I could work down at the bar. It was a conflict of interest for me. And so I took a leave of absence from the family business, the Glick's restaurant downtown, and I went after the Glick beer label. And I was a yoga teacher then, international yoga teacher, teaching all over the world basically. But the guy that owned the Glick label lived in San Diego and pronounced it Glukes. And so he obviously didn't know what to do with it. And so I was teaching yoga 3 times in 2 years out in San Diego. And I would go knock on his door and say, hey, it's Linda. I'm out here teaching yoga. You want to sell me that Gluek brand? And at first he was a little reluctant. He didn't know, what it was worth or what if he was going to do anything with it. But I was persistent. And finally he was like, yeah, if you stop knocking on my door, I'll sell you the brand. So in 2016, I was able to get the rights back to Gluek beer, and I hit the ground running. Luckily, because I was in the bar business downtown, and because Gluek's bar is so old, from the early days, I was friends with Dick Leinenkugel and Mark Stutrud from Summit and Ted Marty from Shells and all those old brewers that really started the craft revolution in Minnesota. And I was buddies with them because I was one of the best accounts for them downtown selling their beer. And so I always had a great relationship with all those guys. And so when I got the Gluek brand, I went and met with all three of them individually just to kind of get some advice and to avoid pitfalls that they maybe could see that I would fall into. And so the three of them helped me tremendously get off the ground, meet the right people so that I could align with a brewer who could do the beer justice. And like I said, I'm not a trend follower. So I always tried to stay in my lane. The first beer that I put out was a true German Pilsner. And I even used the name that the Glicks used to use, which was a Pilsner Pale Ale. And even though it's a lager, um, it's truly a German Pilsner that I think we do an amazing job with. It made it into the medal round at Great American Beer Festival. So the first beer, they were all pretty proud that I came out with a beer that's pretty hard to brew, a good Pilsner. A lot of brewers start out with ales and do a bunch of, easier to brew beers first off, but we went straight out with the Pilsner and I think kind of knocked it out of the park. Um, and so, yeah, that's kind of how I got the the Glick brand revitalized and where it is today.
I was going to ask, I'm sure it was very important to you to have a brewer that obviously knew what they were doing and was able to do the brand justice. How close to the original recipe is the new incarnation? I've had them both. I've had the Pilsner and the cream ale. Is it an entirely new product that respects its roots, or is it pretty similar in profile?
It's pretty similar in profile. It's German inspired but American made. And so we went and found the original recipe. I told you there were 44 recipes that were handed to Heilemann, and they were all kind of chicken scratch. I mean, you can't believe the way these recipes look, and they're all, there's side notes written in pencil and arrows pointing to different mash temperatures and stuff. And so I haven't been able to uncover the 44 recipes, but I definitely have like 4 or 5 of the original recipes. And so we went straight from there, using their Pilsner Pale Lager recipe, which includes Czech Saz hops, but it's 2-row Munich malts. And so we really held true to the ingredients. The only thing change that I made, because I told you I was a yoga teacher, and I also really was fascinated with nutrition, and so we had an enzyme when we pitched the yeast that naturally removes all the gluten. Well, less than 10 parts per million. So I guess there is a crossover contamination in the brewery because there are, glutinous ingredients used. But the enzyme that we add when we pitch the yeast removes the gluten so there's no traceable gluten when we get our quality control reports back. So that was really important to me because beer sometimes makes you feel, I don't know, maybe a little bloated, or there's other words to describe it, but I think our beer really has a crisp, clean finish. It's an all-day drinker, and the gluten removed bit is just a bonus. It's not printed on our cans, and we use it in our marketing materials, but it's actually kind of more of a bonus than a marketing point for me.
Gotcha. Well, I have to talk a little bit about my love for Glick beer. So I kind of late to the game here, but Glick Honeybach. Now I was of age and in college at the time, but you could buy Glick Honeybach, I think, for $8.99 a case at Cashwise Liquor in Duluth. And for a little while, they had a promotion going on where if you bought, I don't know if it was like 2 cases, you got a nice pint glass. Unfortunately, I don't have those anymore. They've gone by the wayside. But yeah, Glick Honeybach was definitely the college beer of choice. It came in at a hefty 5.8% alcohol. If you had that thing ice cold sitting around a bonfire in college, there was nothing better. So I was really sad when I had heard that Glick closed, and then obviously very excited to hear that it's coming back. And I have to ask you, is there a chance we'll see Glick Honeybach ever again?
Jim, there absolutely is. It's so funny that you should say that. That's a great story too. But it's one of the most requested comebacks that I've received, other than the Stite. People either want to taste that Stite again, that Green Death, the original Green Death,
Yeah,
or
that's what
that
my dad called
Honeybach.
it.
And yep, green. It was the original Green Death before Special Expert. So you heard it here
Yep.
first.
Yeah, you're
But
correct.
um, but yeah, the Honeybach. So the Glick family had the Glick Bach, but it was Cold Spring Brewery that created the Honeybach. And so I have the original recipe for the Bach, and I do know the original brewer. His name is Horace, from Cold Spring, who created the Honeybach. And so he and I are pretty tight. And I don't know if I'm gonna have to what I'm gonna have to do to get that Honeybach recipe out of him, but you should see that in the next couple years here, Jim. And I might even put
Oh,
it in a bottle just for old time's sake.
I can't wait. Horace, if you're listening, you're my hero. I would do anything to have a can of the old Glick Honeybach. There was a Glick Red Bach too at the time. I
There
preferred the
was.
Honeybach, but yeah, well, I'm gonna keep my fingers crossed. That would be amazing to be able to have that again one day.
Yeah, the Honeybach was great, and Horace is the goat. So you heard, yeah, he's a good guy.
He's the man. Made for a lot of good college memories and some that I
For
probably
sure.
won't remember too, but that's okay.
And
Okay.
down at Glick's Bar back then, were you there when the liter beers were being served at the
Mm,
beginning? Like
I hate to
it was,
admit this, but I've never visited the restaurant. I'm going to have to now. I don't get to Minneapolis too often, but I'll have to definitely swing in. So no, I haven't been
all
there
right. Well,
yet.
I'll meet you down there when you come into town. Are you up in Duluth?
No, I live in Arlington, Minnesota, which is kind of
Oh, okay.
Mankato, Hutchinson kind of area. I went to college in Duluth, but no, I'm
Perfect.
not up there anymore. I don't think I could survive those winters. 4 years in college was enough.
I'll meet you
Um,
down at Glick's for a pint someday then, Jim.
Sounds fabulous. I guess kind of just to wrap up, other than hopefully the honey bot coming back, what else is in store for the brand? Because you currently have the two beers. Are there going to be more? And then what type of distribution do you have? Where can people buy the beer both in off sale and then find it on tap?
Sure. So I think we will be releasing, I think in 2025, because we're going to do a couple test batches this fall. Probably the Glick Stite will be coming out next, which is going to make a lot of those baby boomers real happy. And then I think the Honeybach, because even the ladies keep asking me for that one, so it'd be nice to get something that really appealed to the ladies. So I think 2025 we could see two new Glicks coming out, two new brands. And
Awesome.
I think with the Glick Stite, we'll probably be doing somewhat of a souvenir 8-pack type of thing in some unique cans to kind of really pay homage to that Green Death that went viral around the nation. I try to stay with the labels. I found a guy that does the old labels for me, and so yeah, I'm pretty excited about what the future holds. I really wanted to get it down and get my processes right and get my team together before we went too crazy. And like I said earlier, I'm really going to stay in my lane. You're not going to find seltzers and sours and stuff coming out of Glicks, because when you think of Glicks, it's kind of synonymous in Minnesota with beer, the word Glick. And when people think of Glicks, they think about that old timey throwback, like this is what my dad or this is what my grandfather used to drink. And it's pretty cool to be able to drink the same beer that your grandfather used to have in his refrigerator. So, I'll probably stay with some really true but tried and true flavors and styles of beer that I think deserve to be on the shelves. And so our distribution in the Twin Cities, Clear River Beverage does a fabulous job for us. They they just keep placing purchase orders and keep selling more Glicks. Last couple weeks back, the Timberwolves made a pretty deep run into the playoffs. So Glick's Bar was hosting in the parking lot next door. We're across from the Target Center. We hosted a couple with the city of Minneapolis and the Timberwolves. A couple block parties where 50,000 people came out, and we sold record amounts of Glick beer in both of those block parties. And so Clear River right now has us obviously down at Glick's Bar. They go through about 20 kegs and about 20 cases every week, which is a fair amount of beer. And then we're in all the Total Wines. We're in a bunch of the little smaller boutique stores like Hums and South Lindale Liquor and Surdix and a lot of your favorite, neighborhood places. CC Club in Uptown has always been a favorite of ours. They've been selling Glick beer in the keg for years now. But yeah, we're all over. We're up in Duluth, St. Cloud. So Burnix has been distributing us up there in kind of college towns, and Super Ones and Cash Wise, and all over greater Minnesota in the Happy Harry's and Hugo's and West Side and stuff like that. So we're kind of scattered throughout the whole state. We have a couple hundred accounts. So I always say, if you can't find us, all you have to do is ask. And then we will find you. But if you ask your retailer to get Glick beer in, I will do my best to bring it there. So, I'm pretty easy to access. We're on social media a lot. And if you just DM us saying, can you get us in, Hennepin Lake Lindale, Hennepin Lake Liquors, we'll get you over there. We'll hook you up.
Excellent. Well, hey, thanks so much for your time. This has been awesome. I learned a lot about Glick, and sounds like a lot of amazing things are on the horizon. So keep my eyes peeled.
Jim, I really appreciate you. Long live Glick beer.
Absolutely. Have a great rest of your day.
Take care of yourself, and I'll see you soon for that pint.
I look forward to it.
Peace.
So what I was talking about here is in the 60s,